The city streets buzzed with life, neon signs flickering as people moved through the night. But for Malcolm, the evening was about to take a turn he never saw coming. Dressed sharp and walking home from a friend's party, he barely noticed the patrol car creeping up behind him, until the red and blue lights flashed, cutting through the darkness like a warning. "Hey, you stop right there," a voice barked. Officer Reynolds, a cop with a reputation for pushing his authority, stepped out, eyes locked on Malcolm's gold chain. Malcolm sighed, already knowing where this was going. "What's the problem, officer?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. Reynolds smirked. "That's a nice chain. Mind telling me where you got it?" Before Malcolm could answer, Reynolds grabbed the necklace, yanking it from his neck with a sharp tug. "Looks stolen," he said, twirling it in his fingers. Malcolm clenched his fists, anger rising, but he knew better than to fight back. Then, just as Reynolds turned to leave with the chain in his hand, a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. The door flew open, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out. "Drop it," the man commanded. "FBI." Reynolds froze, his grip tightening around the chain as his eyes flicked toward the man stepping out of the SUV. The streetlight above cast a sharp glow on his badge, FBI. Malcolm's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold. The agent moved with quiet authority, his eyes locked onto Reynolds. "Hand it over," he repeated, voice steady but firm. Reynolds let out a short laugh, trying to mask his unease. "This is police business," he said, slipping the chain into his pocket. "You're overstepping." The agent took another step forward, his presence demanding attention. "That's funny," he said, tilting his head. "Because last I checked, stealing someone's property wasn't part of your job description." His voice carried weight, but there was something else too, something personal. Malcolm studied the agent, and a flicker of recognition hit him. There was a sharpness in his eyes, a familiar intensity. Then it clicked. This wasn't just any agent. This was his father. Reynolds' jaw clenched, but before he could speak, the agent pulled out his credentials and held them up. "Special Agent Carter," he said. "And I suggest you think real hard about your next move." Reynolds shifted on his feet, his confidence cracking under the weight of Agent Carter's presence. The tension between them thickened, the quiet hum of the city suddenly feeling louder. Malcolm stood frozen, his father's unexpected arrival stirring a mix of emotions. He hadn't seen him in months, maybe longer. And now, here he was, stepping in like some kind of last-minute savior. Reynolds forced a smirk. "You really want to make a scene over a chain." He scoffed, but his voice lacked the arrogance it had before. Agent Carter didn't blink. "I want to make a scene over an abuse of power," he replied, his tone cold. "So how about you reach into that pocket and hand over what doesn't belong to you?" For a moment, it seemed like Reynolds might double down, but something in Carter's stare made him hesitate. His fingers fumbled as he pulled the chain out, letting it dangle between them. Malcolm's eyes locked onto it, his pulse steady but sharp. He wanted to snatch it back, but he stayed still, letting his father handle this. Then Reynolds did something unexpected. Instead of handing the chain over, he smirked and tossed it onto the pavement. "Oops," he muttered. Malcolm clenched his jaw. His father didn't flinch. He just stared, unshaken. "I hope you realize this isn't over," Carter said, his voice lower now, laced with something Malcolm couldn't quite place. Reynolds gave a half shrug and turned back toward his patrol car. "We'll see about that," he muttered before getting in, his engine roaring to life as he pulled away. Silence settled between Malcolm and his father. The chain still lay between them, glinting under the streetlights. "You good?" Carter finally asked, his voice softer now. Malcolm exhaled slowly, bending down to pick up his chain. He dusted it off before looking up at his father. "You tell me," he said. "What are you even doing here?" Carter didn't answer right away. His eyes followed the patrol car disappearing down the street. "I've been watching him," he admitted. "And you just gave me what I needed." Malcolm frowned. "What do you mean?" His father turned back to him, his expression unreadable. "Reynolds isn't just any cop," he said. "He's tied to something bigger." Malcolm felt his stomach tighten. Bigger how? Carter sighed, glancing around before lowering his voice. "You ever hear of a cop running both sides of the law?" Malcolm's breath caught. He knew corruption existed, but the way his father said it made his skin crawl. "You're saying he's dirty." Carter nodded. "And now he knows I'm onto him." Malcolm felt a chill run through him. The way his father spoke, the weight in his voice, it wasn't just about a stolen chain. This was something deeper, something dangerous. Carter glanced down the street again, his eyes sharp, calculating. "You need to be careful," he said. "If Reynolds knows you can connect him to something, that puts you in his sights." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Man, I didn't ask to be part of whatever this is. I was just walking home." His father sighed. "That's the problem, son. You didn't have to ask. You were already caught in it the moment he decided to make you his target." Malcolm looked down at the chain in his hand, his fingers gripping it tighter. "So what now? You just expect me to lay low while you deal with him?" Carter hesitated. "I need proof. Solid proof that ties him to what I know he's been doing." His voice dropped lower. "And I think he just made a mistake." Malcolm frowned. "What do you mean?" Carter pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly before showing Malcolm the screen. A grainy security camera still flickered to life. It was a parking lot, dark, empty, except for one figure standing near an unmarked car. Reynolds. He was meeting someone. Malcolm leaned in. "Who's that?" Carter's expression hardened. "A known trafficker we've been after for months." Malcolm felt his pulse quicken. "And Reynolds is just out here dealing with him like it's nothing." His father nodded. "That's the kind of cop he is." Before Malcolm could respond, the sound of screeching tires cut through the night. Both of them turned just as a black car came flying down the street. Headlights flared, engine roaring. "Get down," Carter shouted. Malcolm barely had time to move before the car swerved toward them, its windows rolling down. A flash of movement, a hand gripping something. Then the sound of a deep, guttural rev as the car sped past. Carter grabbed Malcolm's arm, pulling him behind a parked car just as something small and metallic clattered onto the pavement where they had just been standing. A burner phone. The car didn't slow. It disappeared around the corner in seconds, vanishing into the night. Malcolm's chest rose and fell quickly, adrenaline flooding his system. "What the?" Carter bent down, picking up the phone. His face was unreadable as he turned it over in his hand. Then, without a word, he pressed a button. The screen lit up. One message. Asterisk asterisk back off. Or else, asterisk asterisk. Malcolm felt the weight of it sink into his chest. This wasn't just about a dirty cop anymore. This was bigger. And now they were in the middle of it. Malcolm stared at the phone in his father's hand, the message burning into his mind. Asterisk asterisk back off. Or else asterisk asterisk, the weight of those words settled deep. But before he could process it, Carter's expression shifted, like he'd just put something together. "Malcolm," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. "Did Reynolds pat you down?" Malcolm shook his head. "No, he just grabbed my chain." "Why?" Carter flipped the phone over, inspecting it closer. Then he turned to Malcolm with a look he'd never seen before, something between fear and determination. "Because if they left this for me, it means they think I already know too much. And if they didn't check you, that means—" He stopped mid-sentence, reaching for Malcolm's jacket pocket. Malcolm stepped back, confused. "What are you doing?" Carter ignored him, slipping his hand into the inside pocket. His fingers brushed against something small and hard. He pulled it out. A tiny, nearly invisible tracking device. Malcolm's stomach dropped. "What the?" "They're watching you," Carter said, his voice deadly serious. "They planted this while Reynolds was distracting you." Malcolm's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced back to the way Reynolds had smirked, the way he had toyed with the chain, stretching out the moment. It hadn't been about the necklace at all. He took a shaky breath. "You're saying, this whole time, they've been tracking me?" Carter nodded grimly. "And now they know we found out." A sharp buzz made both of them jolt. The burner phone. A new message flashed on the screen. Asterisk, asterisk, too late. Asterisk, asterisk. Before Malcolm could react, the distant hum of an engine rumbled in the air, growing louder. Carter's head snapped up, eyes scanning the street. Then he saw it. A second car, no headlights, rolling toward them like a shadow in the night. Malcolm's breath hitched. "Dad." "Move," Carter shouted, grabbing his arm and yanking him into the alleyway, just as the car's tires screeched. A door swung open. Heavy footsteps pounded against the pavement. They weren't just being watched anymore. Someone was coming for them. Malcolm's heart pounded as he and Carter darted into the alley, shadows stretching long beneath the flickering streetlights. Behind them, heavy footsteps closed in fast. Whoever was after them wasn't just trying to scare them. They were moving with purpose. Carter yanked Malcolm behind a dumpster, pressing him against the wall. "Stay low," he whispered. His hand was already on his gun, but he didn't draw it, yet. He was waiting, listening. Malcolm held his breath. The alley was silent except for the soft crunch of boots on pavement. Then a deep voice cut through the air. "Agent Carter." Carter stiffened. Malcolm could feel the shift in his father's energy. Whoever this was, he knew them. "Come on out," the voice continued. "You've been digging where you shouldn't. You should have let this go." Carter exhaled sharply. "You and I both know that's not happening," he called back. His voice was steady, but Malcolm could hear the tension underneath. A dark figure stepped forward, illuminated by the dim streetlight. Reynolds, but he wasn't in uniform anymore. No badge. Just a quiet, unshaken confidence as he reached into his jacket. Malcolm tensed. But instead of a gun, Reynolds pulled out something else, another burner phone. He tossed it to the ground between them, the screen flashing with a new message. Carter eyed it warily, then glanced up at Reynolds. "What is this?" Reynolds smirked. "A choice." Malcolm looked at the screen. A single file sat open. A surveillance video. He squinted at the grainy footage, confusion turning to shock as the image became clearer. It wasn't just any clip. It was his father. Meeting with someone in a parking lot. A briefcase exchanged hands. Money. Evidence that painted a very different picture. Malcolm's head snapped up. "What is this?" he demanded. Carter's face was unreadable. "It's fake." Reynolds chuckled. "Is it?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "See, Malcolm, every man in this game gets dirty at some point. Even your old man." Malcolm's stomach twisted. He wanted to deny it, but the video, it looked real. Too real. Reynolds turned to Carter. "Walk away," he said simply, "or this little clip finds its way to every news outlet in the country." Silence stretched between them. Carter's jaw tightened, his mind racing. Then slowly he reached into his pocket, not for his gun, but for something else. A second phone. He tapped the screen, holding it up. Funny thing about surveillance, he said coolly. It works both ways. A new video played, this time of Reynolds. The same parking lot. The same exchange. But this time, it wasn't Carter taking the money. It was Reynolds. Clear as day. Reynolds' smirk faded. Carter stepped forward. Your little trick might have worked if I hadn't been watching you first. Malcolm exhaled, realization sinking in. His father had known all along. He hadn't just been chasing Reynolds. He had been setting him up. Reynolds clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists. For the first time, he looked cornered. Carter's voice was ice cold. This ends now. Suddenly, the wail of sirens pierced the air, red and blue lights flooding the alleyway. More footsteps, this time, fast, organized. FBI agents swarmed in, weapons drawn. Reynolds' face darkened, but he didn't fight. He just sighed, raising his hands. Took you long enough, he muttered. Malcolm stepped back, watching as the agents moved in, cuffing Reynolds and hauling him away. Just like that, it was over. Or at least it should have been. Carter turned to Malcolm, his face unreadable. You okay? Malcolm nodded slowly, but his mind was still spinning. That video. He hesitated. It wasn't real, right? Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then finally he said, not everything is black and white, son. Malcolm's stomach twisted. But before he could press for more, Carter patted his shoulder and started walking away, leaving Malcolm standing there, wondering if he had really just seen justice served, or if he had only glimpsed the surface of something much bigger. Malcolm stood in the alley, watching as the last of the agents loaded Reynolds into a black SUV. The night was still, except for the distant hum of traffic and the low murmur of voices from the FBI team wrapping things up. It was over. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. His father stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the scene with a quiet intensity. Malcolm had a million questions, but the weight of Carter's last words still sat heavy in his mind. Asterisk not everything is black and white asterisk. Finally, Malcolm broke the silence. So what happens now? Carter sighed, glancing at him. Reynolds will face charges. He's not the only one involved, but this is a start. Malcolm nodded, but something still felt off. And that video of you, if it gets out,